All set? Okay. If you want to continue, please.
Before we start, I'd just like to say happy birthday to Rep. Corvese. Oh, it's a significant one.
Thank you for the song.
Okay.
Happy birthday, Doc.
Thanks.
Commissioner, I'll try to keep things moving along. I know hopefully you're not going back to Vermont tonight. The bill we were talking about, for the record, you were the primary sponsor on that, correct?
That is correct.
All right. And when, in its inception and trying to get it done, you assigned certain staff members to work with EDC on that?
That is correct.
Do you recall who those staff members were?
Yeah, mostly it was Sharon Reynolds would work with the EDC staff, and I would, I'm thinking possibly Bobby Carr as well, who was the legal counsel. I don't know that exactly, but that was the usual kind of connection.
Okay. And did you explain to Ms. Reynolds or Mr. Carr the idea about the loan guarantee program, or did you leave that up to them to work it out with EDC?
I left it up. I completely left it up to them to work with EDC.
All right. The language that you referred to before, and I know we didn't make that bill part of the exhibit, but I think it's public record in any event, about the protections, and you particularly pointed to F. Who came up with that language or the idea of those protections?
I mean, probably was and I don't remember, again, I don't know the specific times and dates, but one of the things I was pretty known for doing in any of these programs were putting details aside. I would say I want assurances and protections in the bill. And staff would work. I mean, I remember one previous piece of legislation, which was going back a few years, Project Status, was a tax credit for, I think, bricks and mortar. Companies would come in and say, "Oh, we'll add X jobs, and we promise wages." Well, I wanted proof of that. That was you'll see that actually as one of the protections.
Yeah, and this was a little bit different. At least the loan guarantee, not the program, but the loan guarantee with 38 Studios is a little bit different than bricks and mortar, where you have.
No. I wasn't talking about what I was talking about protections.
Protections.
Right. So even, whether it was, companies always promise jobs. And the state in the past, they promised high-paying jobs. Then you find out when you looked at them, they weren't high-paying jobs. They were low-paying jobs. So this is going back now before this program. We started putting protections in all of these programs. So when a company said we were going to give X jobs and the median was 250% of the median wage, we wanted to measure that and make sure they were actually doing what they said. So we put those kind of protections in a lot of programs. So getting back to your question, when I tell staff, loan guarantee program, work with EDC, we need protections in this program to protect the state, to make sure they're doing the kind of, assessments that need to be done. Very general. The details are worked on like staff to staff.
Even the 250% of more than minimum wage.
Did I say poverty? I meant medium wage. I'm sorry.
I thought you said minimum wage.
Okay, I did.
So that was part of this legislation as well, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Who was supposed to monitor that?
EDC.
EDC.
If you note, if I may, there's, I believe, a report that's required in the legislation.
I recall that. And do you know whether or not? I mean, you left in 2010.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been here, so.
Okay. Did you have any meetings with Mr. Stokes regarding this?
So let me tell you about the meetings I do recall with Mr. Stokes. I know
if you can, and if you recall them, I mean, at least to the best of your ability, when.
Okay, so he traditionally would come in and kind of give me an overview. And this was more of a jogging of my memory now, rather than after I've depositions and okay. So I want to put that on the record. He would come in, I think, yearly, talk about EDC in general, the programs. So I believe we had that kind of a meeting in general. It wasn't specific to the loan guarantee. It was Slater, like the whole menu of programs that they were thinking of doing. So I remember that kind of a meeting. That happened generally every year. They would come in with like a legislative agenda, so to speak. So I do remember that kind of a meeting.
What about meetings particular to 38 Studios?
Yes, I don't remember. So possibly Maynard, when I was at Maynard. You're talking about during the session.
Time between March and
possibly
the
Maynard.
passing of the legislation. I know you said you weren't sure he was in Maynard with you.
So that's why I said possibly.
Right.
So
whether you met with him or spoke with him or he called you or you called him?
I don't recall many discussions on 38 Studios per se with Mr. Stokes.
But there were some.
It's hard for me to recall, to be honest with you.
Well, I say that because you said you don't remember many.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. I really don't remember specific meetings.
So it's probably, maybe, Attorney Carr drafted the legislation. Is that your
I think EDC
recollection?
drafted the legislation.
Stoltzman
Okay. Drafted the legislation, and subsequently we put in some changes and protections.
And when he drafted it, assuming he did, then you would put in the protections, meaning
Right. And we may have made some...
Attorney Carr would come to you.
I'm sorry.
Attorney Carr would come to you with the legislation. Did you go over it with them?
No, I don't remember going over with Attorney Carr. What it might have been was...
Well, when you say we made changes, who made the changes?
Yeah, it might have, well, I'll get there. It might have been Sharon Reynolds and Bob Carr together that looked at the legislation to make sure the protections were in. I wasn't involved in that interaction, so it's hard for me to figure out how it actually got to me in its form. So I'm trying to give you what traditionally would happen in finance.
Okay. But eventually it got to you.
Yes.
And you reviewed it.
I reviewed it.
And Carl was legal counsel.
Yes.
Did you, if you had any questions, did you run them by him?
No, I didn't really have many questions. I saw the protections were in there.
And
I
you
was
satisfied?
I was satisfied.
Did you ever speak to Keith Stokes personally about proposed amendments or changes when the bill came back to you for review? Or did you leave that up to Sharon Reynolds and
Yeah,
Mr.
I left
Carr?
it up to staff.
All right. And again, the only staff that you can recall working on it would have been Sharon Reynolds, who's really a numbers person, not a lawyer.
Right.
Okay. Or business, whatever her master's is.
I've been accused of being a lawyer, but that's dangerous.
Sorry to hear it. And then there was Mr. Carr.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we had talked about earlier what you thought, and I think you said you went to Stokes, and I believe it was Stokes you said you went to, and said, basically, what do we need for the program?
Well, what I said
For the whole
was-
program.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was. No, I didn't say Stokes. I thought I said it was at the meeting in Maynard. I'd asked the question. I'm not sure who answered the question, who I was talking to.
Not what at the time, not what 38 Studios specifically wanted, but about, hey, what do we need to make this work?
What
The
does
whole-
the
the whole
business
program
community
Needs.
need?
And I asked you some questions about that already. Okay. Now, again, you've read some depositions, okay? And I know from Mr. Stokes' deposition that he indicated that you said for 38 Studios we should increase, and I'm not quoting, we should increase this program from 50 to $125 million. Do you recall having that conversation?
No,
with
and it's
him?
interesting because I don't even know where 50 came from.
In past years, when these programs were out there, and you sort of, my own word, squashed them because you didn't believe in them. Okay, was that number?
That number
ever
might have
used?
been out there, but every year is a different year.
No, I,
I mean,
no, certainly, but I'm just saying,
that number might have, but
could it
I-
have been out there in the past?
It could have been.
And did that number ever come up in initial discussions about a loan guarantee program for 2010?
I don't recall.
All right, so the trip to Maynard, and then this number, whatever it is, and you're looking for a number that might work, and somebody says, hey, it should be 125 million, right?
I do want to tell you what I was concerned about. In my mind, kind of on the 125, and I know why I asked what was in the business community, because I was concerned that this amount of money would go to one company, and we wouldn't take care of the other businesses in Rhode Island. But that's why, that's the thought process in my mind, and why I'm asking whoever's at the meeting, what's the business need in the community? Because if there's a substantial loan that potentially goes out there, that means nobody in Rhode Island has a chance to participate in the program.
Yeah, and even with $50 million left, did you ever envision, or did you envision in March when you first visited 38 Studios that $75 million was going to go to one company?
Did I envision it?
Yeah. Was it discussed?
I think we talked about this earlier. You asked me if a number. I know the number was substantial.
Yeah, sure.
And I was concerned that a substantial amount of money would go to one company, and I wanted to know what was the business need. I thought I've answered this, but what was the business need in the community? And it was 125. So if it was 75, 50, whatever number, substantial is substantial. And can you imagine if we had just put 75 in this program and all of it went to one company and left none left over? I was really concerned about the needs of the Rhode Island. As I said, we had done a lot of work with the small business community, knowing their needs, saying that they needed this. The access to capital was squeezing businesses to a point where they couldn't survive. So, this was kind of a different environment.
So, well, let me get back to my original question. I guess having read the transcripts of the depositions and knowing what Mr. Stokes said, do you recall ever saying, hey, if we want 38 Studios in effect, why don't we just, let me retract that. Did you ever say to Mr. Stokes, why don't we just increase it from 50 to $125 million to accommodate 38 Studios?
No.
Did you ever say that?
No.
You have any idea who's came up with the ultimate idea? I mean, obviously you said you had discussions about what's needed in the business community, and $125 million was the number. So do you recall who you discussed that with? Was it Mr. Stokes? Was it Mr. Saul? Was it?
I don't remember who I discussed it with. I do know that I agreed with the number. I do know in the hearing they talk about $125 million in the April hearing. And that draft Kushner that I mentioned earlier.
You've agreed, Commissioner, that shortly after your visit to 38 Studios, the legislation was almost being drafted immediately. You agree with that?
Yes, the staff started working on it fairly quickly.
And your position in your deposition today was that the $125 million you thought would fulfill EDC's obligation to the entire business community.
Potential obligation.
Potential obligation. Okay. And again, you've indicated that you yourself didn't visit any other companies other than 38 Studios at the time, right? In 2010, March 2010.
Yeah, it's a difficult time for me because I was also running for mayor shortly after that. But
I know,
during this period, no.
Yeah, during this period.
Right.
Because, you know, and I know that an election can take up a lot of time, especially a mayoral election. But this was not, you know, this wasn't a cup of coffee. This is $125 million. So no doubt that during that period of time between March and May when the bill passed, there were no visits to any of the companies by you.
That's correct.
It's your knowledge, none by Speaker Fox, if you know.
I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't know.
Okay. Mr. Stokes, if you know.
I think you asked me this.
I may have.
Yeah, you did. I don't know.
I know. Sometimes my notes are, we already discussed something, and I know we discussed that. But I don't know if I could ask you about Mr. Stokes. And that's why I'm pausing. So I'm trying not to be too repetitive, Commissioner.
That's fine. This is complicated, I understand.
All right. Now, bless you. If you could, Commissioner, turn to Exhibit 2. And I'm sorry they're not tabbed, but
I got it.
it's sort of a one-man show putting this together. And I'll read Exhibit 2, and if I read it incorrectly, please let me know.
Yes.
It's from Keith Stokes. It's addressed to Michael Stoll, Rob Stoltzman, Fred Hashaway.
Yes.
It's dated April 2nd of 2010.
Yes.
Now, there is some indication in one that there's already been contact with Schilling by March 17th. You've indicated that you think that you went up there on the 30th.
Right.
This is dated April
My
2nd.
deposition, I say the end of March, beginning of April. But
I have been speaking with Steve Constantino regarding our project, and he has been directed by Speaker to post hearing for next Tuesday the budget article for EDC. I told Steve we are nowhere ready for a public hearing. Did I read that correctly? That's just the first 2 lines. So
yes, I got it.
okay. Does that refresh your recollection about any
No, and
particular discussions?
why it doesn't, because, I've got, on the, and again, going back to the hecticness of the budget process, I would talk to department directors every single, scheduling hearings was always something that went back and forth. I don't remember specifically this conversation at all. But it's not uncommon for me to be talking to directors or department heads on, can they make this hearing? Can they make that hearing? Are you ready for this?
And this is about particular legislation. Doesn't
Yes.
indicate that it was about 38 Studios, but it was about that particular legislation. You
Yes.
agree? If you look down about from the hearing, 3 lines, I will speak with Gordon, presumably Gordon Fox, correct?
Correct.
And Mike Corso tonight with my request that we may not go to supplemental budget route, but instead drop legislation or place in FY 2011 budget. The question is, will a month in delay loose, L-O-O-S-E, I think that's an error, lose the interest of 38? Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay. So from going from regular, from a general discussion about the legislation, Stokes is then interested, is he not, in losing the interest of 38 because it's, in effect, not moving fast
I want to
enough?
make it very clear that I'm not on this email.
Oh, and I've indicated who's on it.
Yes.
I'm just asking if it refreshes your recollection.
Not at all.
If you were on it, I would have pointed that out, certainly, Commissioner.
Okay.
And I don't think there's an email here in which you're copied. So please.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that clarification.
I will make that clear going forward.
Yes, I don't remember this part of it that you just asked, mentioned is...
You do agree it's dated April 2nd.
Yes,
And I think what I've read in, and I've been asked to try to expedite things a little bit, so...
I'll try to be as direct as I can.
As I will. So I'm not going to ask you about what it means, because it means what it says. I didn't read anything into that, correct?
Yeah, I can tell you what...
I didn't add anything.
I explained what supplemental budget was earlier
yes, you did.
in the testimony.
You
so,
did. And you indicated that, hey, you don't recall any of these conversations with Mr. Stokes.
Yes.
Okay. I do have one further question about that email, and I'm pretty sure you're not going to know, but do you know why Michael Corso would be included in this conversation?
I have no idea.
And again, he wasn't a rep, he wasn't an EDC member, he was a lobbyist, right?
I guess he was. I think that's being questioned right now. But
and no indication of whether or not he was actually being paid or employed by 38 Studios.
I have no idea.
Cover that. I'm going to get through it, Commissioner. I would like to direct your attention to Exhibit 3, Commissioner Constantino. Now, that's actually a 3-page exhibit.
Okay.
And the last page...
long.
I'm sorry, do you have it in front?
Yes, I got it. 3-page.
All right, 3-page. The third page is actually the first in the email chain, which is reflected in Exhibit 2.
Yeah.
So we won't look at that. Page 2 is a response from Stoltzman. Did you look at that? Will you look at that, please?
Page 2?
Yes. Starting at the top, from Rob Stoltzman to Keith Stokes,
yes.
Michael Saul, and again, no question you're not included on this, just seeing if it refreshes your recollection. Hi all, we are not ready to announce 38 Studios. And again, this is April 2nd.
Yeah, I'm good.
We can do a hearing on the program and not 38 Studios per se. Jumping down a couple of lines, we can later approve the company as planned.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Do you see where I'm reading?
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
All right, let me start over. Hi all, you see that?
Yes.
Okay. We are not ready to announce 38 Studios. We can do a hearing on the program and not 38 Studios per se. So you agree, Stoltzman saying, hey, we can talk about the loan guarantee program, but we're not going to bring up 38 Studios.
I get that.
Is that a fair interpretation?
Yes.
All right. If we talked about the need for growth of capital guarantee program, then they can approve that generally, meaning, again, the program.
Yeah.
And we can later approve the company as planned. You see that?
Yes.
All right. And I read that correctly, correct?
You did.
As a fair interpretation of that is that on April 2nd, there's a plan in place to approve 38 Studios for a particular sum of money.
Well, I think that's one interpretation.
All right. If you went up there on
it doesn't say the approval is done.
No. But as planned.
Right.
And you went up there, best your recollection was March 30th, right?
Right.
Okay. So 30 days in March? 31? 3 days later.
Yeah.
Stoltzman's already talking about, hey, we're going to approve the company as planned. And, it's pretty evident that he has something specific in mind. Would you agree with that? It's not your words.
No, I mean,
All right,
I
let's,
don't know what as planned means. That doesn't mean that's going through the approval process. So I'm not going to speculate on what he means on this. I've never, like I said, I wasn't on this email, so I'm reading it like everybody else here is reading it.
so let's
All right,
let's
so-
get to the next. And let me get to the next sentence, Commissioner. Well, that would WOULS
Yes,
typo. While that would fuel speculation, it would help keep the company to have. It would help the company to have the Kushner in hand. And what is the Kushner, Commissioner?
The joint resolution.
That's the joint resolution.
That allows everybody understands Kushner.
Well, I'm building a record. We're building a record here. So
Do I have to explain what a Kushner is, or
just briefly.
okay? Kushner is the mechanism by which the legislature is allowed to approve lending, approve bonding, borrowing. It's another mechanism. The other mechanism, obviously, is going to the voters, which is a general obligation bond. Kushner is the mechanism that legislatures, and we call it Kushner after Representative Kushner, but it is that resolution that allows the state to borrow money.
And that's for the people who don't know. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Mike can fill you in on the company's needs, but they need to know if we can perform right away, then 60 to 90 days to close. And this is April 2nd, correct? Okay. Now, going over to page 1, if you will, Commissioner.
Same exhibit?
Same exhibit. I'm sorry. A reply from Keith Stokes at the bottom. And that is sent to Mike Saul.
Yep.
Company needs to know the Kushner has passed. The company needs to know the Kushner has passed within 2 weeks. A Tuesday hearing on the program will require some preparation. And did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
All right. And then up to, not the top of the page, but say maybe halfway down the page, is another email from Stokes to Saul. And again, you're not copied on this.
Okay.
Indicates, and Stokes writes, Steve Constantino wants to move on it next week. He has also spoken to Steve Lane. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Now, this is April 2nd. Do you have any recollection of telling Stokes that you wanted it done
Again,
next week?
it's not uncommon for me to talk to directors on scheduling of hearings,
No.
but I don't particularly remember this conversation.
Okay. You indicated earlier that when it's would you have considered this a bill or part of the budget?
Right. So right now we are in April, right?
Correct.
April. So we're talking about budget article. Budget article.
Budget article. So you indicated earlier, much earlier, and I know we've been at this for a while, that if it's a budget article, it's usually held for about 7 days before.
No,
That's after the
we're in
committee hearing.
This is hearing process. Right.
After the
Yes.
committee hearing. What about conversations with Steve Lane? Did you recall? Does this refresh your recollection as to any conversations you had with him?
I've had conversations with Stephen Lane about EDC programming in general, and it gets back to what I said earlier. The conversations was much in line with what I said about this Keith Stokes. You know, he said that there would be mostly my conversations with Stephen Lane was mostly on Slater. He had an interest in the Slater Fund and that mechanism.
All right. Would you agree that this chain email talks about, however, not only about the loan guarantee program generally, but about 38 studios specifically?
Do I agree that this email?
The whole chain.
Well, they do mention Slater in this chain.
They do.
Yes.
But
So
they also
wanna
mentioned 38 studios,
Right.
correct?
And that's the Slater program, not Representative Slater. I just want to say.
What's that?
That's the Slater program at EDC, not Representative Slater. So.
Understood. Okay. We've talked about Tom Zaccanino, correct? Jen McLean. Mr. Corso. Now, we've talked about Mr. Corso a little bit. You've run into him. You saw him with the speaker on a couple of occasions, or one occasion, you said specifically.
Yes.
Right. And in fact, that was the XO?
Yes.
And he was with Schilling.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to be repetitive. If I may, Commissioner, refer you to Exhibit 4. Which is another email, and this one's from Rob Stoltzman,
Yes.
dated March 31st, sent to Stokes, Mike Saul, Fred Hashway, Maureen Garigian, Paul Campolone. Okay, and I'm just going to refer you to the last paragraph at this point in time.
I have it.
Indicates Michael Corso for 38 Studios has already begun asking to see the Kushner. And Sharon Reynolds from House Finance also called on behalf of Chairman Constantino, and we exchanged calls. Now, this is perhaps a day after your visit to 38 Studios. Do you recall?
There are 31 days in March.
I'm sorry?
There are 31
There are
days
31
in
days in March. I forget the rhyme. Does this refresh your recollection?
I don't recall this specific conversation.
All right. And it's not very specific, but do you have any recollection of instructing Miss Reynolds?
That's what I meant.
Right,
I don't-
to call Stoltzman about anything relative to this?
I don't recall.
In that quick a time frame?
No, I do not. Again, I'm not on the email. I know you mentioned that, but it's.
And if I can, Commissioner, I'm going to refer you to the first paragraph, and it says, again, hi all. Again, I am attaching a draft of a very short memorandum from Keith Stokes to Governor Kacheri, summarizing where we are to date. The memo is very simple, and we should attach to that information you have on the gaming industry and on 38 Studios. I have also attached a mock and clean draft of a proposed letter of intent between RIEDC and 38 Studios reflecting discussions to date. Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
So, one, as far as 4, there's no recollection of you having any conversations with Sharon Reynolds, but I'm going to ask you to look at Exhibit 5, Commissioner.
So, am I off 4?
Or 4. On to 5, I'm sorry.
Okay.
And is that before you, sir?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And that is a memo to Governor Kacheri, correct?
Yes.
Not that you drafted it. It's indicated in number 4. It's a memo from Stokes to then Governor Kacheri, dated March 31, 2010.
Yes.
Fair to say?
Correct.
And I ask you to look at the last paragraph. Now, again, this is one day after your recollected visit to 38 Studios. 38 Studios has raised approximately $40 million of capital equity so far, with Kurt Schilling providing...
I'm sorry, are you reading the last paragraph?
Last paragraph
I'm
on the
sorry.
first page. I
That was on the
apologize.
second page.
I apologize.
Yep.
I wasn't clear on that. First page.
Got it.
Providing 75% of that in his own equity contribution. The company indicates that it has an additional $35 to $40 million of equity committed. In addition to that additional committed equity, the company needs approximately $75 million to complete the intellectual property development and production of both the RPG and MMO phase of the game. Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
And so this is a day after, or at least days within your visit to 38 Studios. Fair to say?
Yes.
And it's the following day, Stokes is already proposing that 38 Studios be given, or be discussed, $75 million loan or loan guarantee, whatever term you want to use, from the state of Rhode Island. Is that fair?
That seems to be the case.
Okay. And if we can jump over to 6, if you will.
Exhibit 6?
Yes. And this is a letter of intent. Okay. Had you seen this before,
Never.
Commissioner?
First time.
All right. So you'll see at the top, and there are a couple of copies in here, and I'm not. Let's just stick with this one.
Okay.
I think the next copy is Exhibit 12, just because it's dated differently. But you'll see where it says March, and it's struck through, correct?
Correct.
And then April 2010, but no specific date. You agree with that?
Yes.
Addressed to Mr. Schilling and Ms. McLean, CEO of 38 Studios.
Correct.
All right. I'm going to ask you to look at the last paragraph on the first page, under where it says product development financing. Now again, if this was originally drafted in March, we understand your capital needs to bring your project Copernicus to MMO completion to be $75 million. Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
If I may, bear with me here, jump down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines.
1, 2, 3.
We anticipate, see it?
Yes.
We anticipate that these guaranteed loans would be made by, or bonds would be purchased by or through a lender or lenders familiar with your industry. Correct?
Correct.
So I've read that correctly. And if you jump over to page 2, Commissioner. About not quite halfway down the page, says borrower, 38 Studios.
Yes.
Loan amount, $75 million. So in reviewing these exhibits, Commissioner, and while you may not have seen it before, is there any doubt in your mind today that Stokes and Stoltzman were already in discussions guaranteeing 38 Studios a sum of $75 million?
I have no, after reading this, it seems that they were a long way along the process of doing that. Again, whether that's the final process, that's why I conditioned that statement.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. These are draft.
They're drafts.
They're drafts.
But that's what happened in effect, isn't it?
Yes, but I don't know when it finally.
Well, no, but I mean, this is dated March.
Yeah.
And then April. You agree with that, right?
Yes.
And then the budget hearing's held, or the finance committee hearing is held, and the legislation is approved, right?
Yes.
And then 38 Studios is given a $75 million loan, a loan guarantee.
Remember, the legislation was approved in May.
May. Right. But clearly, this was being discussed back in March.
Absolutely, clearly.
Right. So is it any surprise that when whoever you talked to at EDC suddenly said, well, yeah, maybe we need $125 million? Because they couldn't give the whole 75 to Kurt, right?
Well, I was against that. So
that would have been a good decision. We're going to skip over 7, which is just a cleaner draft of 6.
7?
Yeah, no, we're going to skip over 7.
Oh, okay.
It's a cleaner draft of 6. And since we're not going to discuss it, it's really the same thing, but I'm going to remove it as a full exhibit, okay? And I believe, Commissioner, that officially or unofficially, it's 8 o'clock and my time is up, at the request of the committee, so that they can ask you a few questions.
Sure.
So although I would have another 15 minutes or so, I'll defer.
Thank you.
It is their committee. Thank you for appearing.
Okay. Couple of minutes?